Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we got a special video. This is the Grimsmo Knives Norseman. When it comes to mid-tech knives and the kind of upper end of the blurred end of production knives, the Norseman pretty much sits at the top. Grimsmo has been making the Norseman for a long time now, thus it has had plenty of time to garner the reputation that it has. It like I said, it basically sits at the top of the production knife world right now. So you've probably seen one of these before. If not, let me tell you a little bit about it. Grimsmo Knives is a Canadian company. It's John and Eric Grimsmo. They make pretty much just the Norseman at this point. They made the Rask, which is another knife. Well, their only other knife they ever made. It's a little bit smaller than this. It's about the same width. Different blade shape, as you'll see. The Norseman has a very unique blade shape, and that's part of why it's so memorable to most people. But they make the Norseman, the Rask. They make the Saga pen, which is a titanium milled pen that they have been producing for a couple of years now. They recently just started doing it again. And they make the occasional fidget spinner and top and things like that. So the thing with the Norseman is it's made on a CNC mill, so it's not handmade. It's not a custom knife, and as you can see you can see those lines, the kind of striations on the blade. Those are the mill marks from where the machine went and ran its tool path to shape the blade, and each little step is just kind of the step that the drill bit made as it was making these blades. And what 99% of most makers would do is they would just grind this out. They would just make sure they have a nice flat satin edge, as opposed to this. Some of the controversy behind this knife, or maybe part of the reason why people who don't like this knife don't like it, is because they think this is lazy. They think that the Grimsmo brothers just decided to leave the mill lines in there because they're lazy. It might be, but it has certainly made a very, very kind of notable aspect of these knives. So some people like it, some people don't. You can feel them. It adds a little bit of texturing, and you can hear it if I might be able to, but you can kind of hear the sound versus if I go like this. Nothing. So there's that. Then, as you probably have been saying to yourself, wow, that blade looks really weird. That's the other very distinctive part of the Norseman. It's kind of a recurved tanto blade, very unique, very oddly shaped, and from what I've heard, difficult to sharpen, which makes sense. Not only does it have this curved portion, but you've got this kind of weird compound grind going on up there at the top. So part of the thing with the Norseman and with the Grimsmo knives in general is they are mid-techs, which means they're made in batches. So they're more limited than normal production knives, but they're not custom knives. And what they have done with the Norseman is they have made a variety of handle milling patterns and options, as well as the anodization colors, the hardware accents, and even blade types. So right here we have the honeycomb pattern. This is I don't know if this was the original pattern or if it has just kind of become the most common, but to me I think I've seen more honeycomb patterns than any other style of the handles. So there's the honeycomb, there's the reverse honeycomb, which you can see that the honeycomb portion of this is depressed and or kind of recessed into the handle, and the lines are kind of the relief part of the handle. Well, the reverse honeycomb is the reverse. The honeycombs pop out of the handle, whereas the lines in between are sunken in or milled directly into the handle. So those are two of the handle options. The other two are the diamond pattern, which a little hard to explain, but it's a diamond. There are a bunch of diamonds milled into the handle, and they're kind of sequential, almost like the diamonds you'd see on like a floor mat in your garage or something like that. And then the final option is just plain Jane, flat, nothing special. Well, I guess there is technically another one. Those are the inlays. Inlays are very rare for the Norseman. I would imagine they've only done less than 10 of the odd 3,000 they've made so far. They have carbon fiber inlays. For Blade Show, they did Norseman number 2000, I believe. Had mother of pearl inlays. It was very unique, interesting design. But those are the handle options, and then of course the colors. As you can imagine, they can pretty much make any color they want with the titanium. And then for blades, you can either get stone wash, this kind of satin stone wash. They have Damasteel. I don't think they do mirror finishes, and they also do black washed and acid washed. So a lot of options, a lot of variety, kind of something for everybody, which is cool, but it's also a little kind of nerve-wracking if you're trying to get one, because there are so many options, which means there's a lot of options that you might like and there's a lot of options that you might not like. So with me, I wanted any styled handle pattern, or any pattern handle, I should say. I did not want the plain handles. I don't like the look of that. I think it kind of makes the knife less valuable to me, because these are pricey, as I'll get to in a minute. And so just having a plain titanium with nothing special going on is not gonna really inspire me to fork over the money to pay for this. I also wanted kind of a cool color combo. I didn't want it to be plain. I didn't want plain titanium with like a yellow thumb stud and some yellow screws. So when this guy popped up on the Grimsmo Buy Sell Trade Facebook group, I kind of decided I should go for it. And so I ended up selling my Microtech UTX 70 Hellhound, my anodized Spidey Chef, and my Mastrop Keen. So those were some hard decisions to make, but in the end I pulled together enough cash to pay for this guy. So what I have here on this one is, like I said, the honeycomb pattern. The honeycomb is purple anodized with ice blue accents and ice blue hardware. I think it's done extremely well, as not only the hardware is beautiful, like it's very nice coloring. As you can see, the screws, they kind of have a little bit of flair added to them with the holes on the outside of the rim. And then for the anodization, I really like how they kind of left the center of the honeycomb itself closer to the purple than the blue. I think that's a great design choice. And then this side is just full purple, but as you can see, it's kind of splotchy, which is just from my fingerprint. All anodized titanium are fingerprint magnets, specifically the oil of your fingerprints. But some Windex takes care of it. I tried to get it all off before I started this video, but I've been kind of flipping it around, so it's kind of all came back. This is number 2097. So like I said, they've made close to 3,000, if not 3,000 already. So this is a newer model. I don't know if they've changed anything or had any kind of quality control initiatives that they've kind of made newer versions of whatnot, any part of the knife. But yeah, that's a long story of the Norseman and the Grimsmos and kind of what you can get. So if we want to move on to this knife in particular, just kind of my thoughts, one thing that really stands out to me besides the coloring and the design options is the little Grimsmo Norse dude right there serving as the pivot, or one of the sides of the pivot. If you should be able to tell that the sides are squared off or flattened. So this is not a circle, which means that it can lock into place, making it a fixed pivot, if that's the right terminology, as opposed to a free spinning pivot. Free spinning pivots are annoying. Most people don't like them, but they still exist. And even surprisingly, on a knife like the Holt Spectre here, this has a free spinning pivot. Also, the Shirogorov knives all have free spinning pivots, which can be a problem if you use a lot of Loctite. For me, I don't use Loctite on my knives, which, it's a personal choice. I just have never had an issue with screws coming loose or whatnot, so I've never had a reason to use it. but it couldn't be an issue. So fixed pivot, thumbs up. Really like that. It makes it easier to put together and take back apart, and it makes it easier for centering and putting the knife back together, which I'll get to in a minute. This side, the hardware is super easy to take apart. As you can tell, the body screws and the pivot screw are all the same size torque. I think they're a T9 or T8. So super easy to take apart. You only need one tool. And while we're speaking on the topic of tools, we can talk about the packaging that it comes in, because in this nice little Pelican-esque case with the Grimsmo logo on it, and proudly made in Canada. If you open it up, on the inside, you can see where the Norseman goes. It comes with nano oil, which is awesome. Like I can't think of any other knife that comes with nano oil besides the Chris Reeve knives. So that's a very kind of generous and nice touch that I think a lot of makers should follow suit with, and along with the fact that they give you the tools to take it apart. In this case, it's one tool. It's just the T9 bit. But if even if you have a Norseman, you probably are going to have some way of taking it apart and cleaning it if you're at that level of collecting. But if you don't, this box gives you everything you need. You've got lubricant and then a way to take it apart. The only thing else besides that you would need is like a little cloth, microfiber cloth. But so that's fantastic, and I think that really adds to the value of this knife, or at least justifies it, which again I'll talk about a little bit later. So while we're still on the design aspects of the knife, again, easy construction. You've only got two barrel spacers, that is, or standoffs, whatever you'd like to call them. Easy disassembly. I really like this touch right here, how they put the little Norse Viking on the pocket clip with the accent anodization color. I think that's a really nice touch. You can see right there that flash of blue underneath the lock bar is the lock bar over travel stop. It is nice that the lock bar also kind of is symmetrical. As you can see, it has the same shape of the handle on both sides. And then, of course, the other legendary thing about the Norseman, and the reason it's gotten its reputation, is its action. Very drop shut, finger guillotine. The one thing that kind of surprises me is that, let's see if I can get to do it. If you kind of catch the knife at the wrong or right angle, I don't even know what to call it, but sometimes when you close the knife, the blade will bounce off of the stop pin, I guess, and kind of it'll close. You'll hear it close, but then the blade will bounce back and it will kind of sit like this. And so, all you have to do is just move it, but oh, there it did. Yeah, so you heard that, the kind of the double click. That was it bouncing. I assume that's because the blade's pretty big. There's a lot of steel here, so it's got some momentum. And I guess when it hits the stop pin, it kind of, that momentum reverberates back out and pops the blade out again. So kind of a little fun fact, I guess. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to call it, but I can't think of another knife that does that. So interesting thing. You'll see that it's only got one-sided thumb stud. That kind of makes sense. It doesn't really bother me. Part of me wishes it did have two thumb studs, because I can kind of flick it out with my thumb, so of course I would want to try and do it with my middle finger here, almost like a Spidey flick, but I'll survive without two thumb studs. What else can we talk about before we get into the nitty-gritty specs? When I first got this knife, I took it apart because I do that. Sometimes it's a bad decision because I can't put the knife together as well as it was when it came to me, and I think that happened with this one. But what happened was, as you can see, the blade is just a little bit off-center, and honestly, that doesn't bother me a lot. It's just a super nitpicky thing that I can sit here and be like, oh, the blade's off-center, blah, blah, blah. But when I put it back together, everything is fine on the inside. I fixed, I put it together correctly. Very easy to take apart. But I got to the point where I was tightening the pivot, and that's always when things go wrong, if they're going to go wrong. And so what happened, the reason it is off center is because this is where I have found it to have the best action possible, but to also have no blade play. And I could loosen the pivot by like just an eighth of a turn, and the blade would be perfectly centered, but there would just be the smallest bit of blade play. And that bothers me more than, the blade play bothers me more than it being off center. Because the only place that's going to matter is if I go to sell this knife and I take the centering shot and people are like, oh, it's off center. So I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But right now, this guy's perfectly dialed in. Honestly, I don't think it quite has the drop shut, like guillotine level as some other Norsemans I've handled, but I like that. I don't want to have to fear for my finger's life whenever I'm closing the darn thing. So the fact that it's just a tad less smooth than other Norsemans is perfectly fine with me, if not desirable. So I'm glad that happened. The other thing with this knife is that the detent, I would say, is on the medium to high side. So it's not, when I first started fooling around with it after I took it apart and put it back together, it was kind of pissing me off just how hard I had to push the knife, or push the flipper tab to get it to open. But I think I've just kind of gotten over the hump, so to speak, of the detent ramp, or the detent hole. So it has lightened up a little bit, and I'm happy about that. This is one of those knives that if you squeeze the handle, if you squeeze the scales while deploying the knife, it makes it harder to deploy. So that's a little bit annoying, but as I'm trying to do it right now, it's not as bad as when I was fiddling with it the other day. So I guess I moved something into the right place. So right now this guy's perfectly dialed in, and I'm very happy with it. So enough of me rambling though. How about we'll do a size comparison, and then we'll get on to the specs of it all. I guess the size comparison will lend that to the first statistic that we'll look at, which will be the length. So if we get all our knives in the frame, we can start out with the Koenig knives Arius, and let's see if I line it up end to end. They're about the same size, which is a little bit surprising to me, if I'm honest. I thought the Norseman would be bigger, but I do forget how large the Arius is. Let's see, next we can do the Spyderco Paramilitary 2 on the top here. Close, maybe, yeah. I mean, it's got about half an inch on the PM2, so PM2 is probably a knife that most of you guys are going to have. So lastly, we can do the Benchmade 940. Man, the blade's all gunked up. I need to clean that. And then how about the Microtech Ultratech? So as you can see, it's within the normal size range. I remember before I had handled a Norseman, I just kind of had this mental image of it being enormous and it being huge and weird looking and whatnot. And I think, honestly, it's just kind of like the proportions of this knife, how the blade kind of has an equal amount of size compared to the handle, which you don't see in a whole lot of knives, at least. Or if they are, they're kind of blended more organically. That might just be me, but I thought this guy was big, and then I handled one, and I was like, oh, it's not. It's really not. It's a normal size, and as I just showed, it's like an Arius size, and everybody loves the Arius. So while we're on the topic of size, we can look at the overall length, which is in the 8 range, if I can pull up my little chart here. 8.7. So that is on the upper end of what some people might like. With the blade makes up 3.7 of those 8.7 inches. So under half. The handle is perfectly sized for me. The curvature here with these kind of finger grooves lines up perfectly with my natural grip, as well as my pinky kind of sitting on this little indent right here before the butt of the knife. And it's got some nice big thick jimping here on the back of the blade. Another thing we can point out here while we're on the subject of the spine is that it is rounded, which is a design choice that some people like, some people don't. The only other knife that I have had pass through my collection with a rounded spine was the Todd Begg Mini Glimpse. Or no, it was a full-size glimpse, but it was the Riot Steelcraft series glimpse. So, and I remember thinking that was a little weird. But on this knife, it kind of makes sense. This knife has a very weird design. There's nothing else like it. And, you know, the fact that the blade spine is curved just kind of adds to it, makes its own little quirk. So like we said, the blade is 3.7 inches, which means that the handle makes up the other 5 inches. Of course, the handle is titanium. The blade steel is RWL 34. I have no knowledge or really like experience in blade steels and whatnot, other than like the occasional like edge retention, sharpness, corrosion, whatnot little graphs that I've seen on like Blade HQ and stuff. But I can list off a number of blade steels off the top of my head, but RWL 34 would not be one of them, and I cannot think of another knife that uses this steel. So kind of reminds me of the Shirogorovs, which if I pull over my hottie here, its blade steel is Vanax 37, which is another rare one. So interesting blade steel choice. Couldn't tell you the benefits or like the how it holds up against other blade steels. So if you're interested in that, I imagine you could find some things about that online. If we want to do the weight, got a scale here I can use. That's new, right? So if you pop it on there, you get to 4.95 ounces. Statistically, or according to other sources, it should be 4.8, whatever, 2/10 of an ounce is not a make or break thing, but 5 ounces. Once you cross that boundary into 5 ounces is when you start making people cringe. I feel like people can get very kind of anal about how much their knife weighs and how it carries in the pocket and whatnot, and that's for a perfectly valid reason. If you have shorts on without a belt, you probably don't want your knife to weigh like almost half a pound. It's gonna drag down some important stuff. But on the other hand, if you're wearing pants or jeans or like anything else that's held up or that fits you right, you're probably not going to notice this in your pocket unless your phone's in that pocket and you're going to be reaching in there all the time and bumping into this heavy chunk of metal. But the weight doesn't bother me. I guess the kind of the last thing we can talk about is the price, which the Norseman has kind of gone through some evolutions in price as it has existed on this earth. I believe they started in the, I want to say 500. I honestly want to say they started in like the 500 range. Might be true, might not. Don't quote me on that. I know that they have been sitting in the 800s for the recent future. What am I talking about? The recent past. I'd say about half their models are still in the 800 range, but now they have been pushing up into the 900s and even the thousands. This particular guy, if you go onto the Norseman archives, you will see its MSRP or retail was $940. It's expensive. It's expensive for a mid-tech knife that you don't get to design or have any input on. So to some people, anything above $500 is a waste of money when it comes to knives. But if you're rolling this high, then you might be a little queasy when it comes to that number. I paid $850 net, so realistically I paid $870 because of PayPal goods and services fees. But I paid $850 for this guy. very happy to get it, and almost like $100 cheaper than retail, because the previous owner said he had just kept it in the safe, not flipped it once. So, but $940, I don't know if I would pay of course I would, because I did, but like on the inside, I'm like, ooh, I don't know, just because it's a lot of money. I mean, I paid $100 more than that retail for this knife, and this has a full Timascus clip and a Timascus backspacer, and it is incredibly intricately milled, and it's got a near mirror blade finish and whatnot. So there are little things like that you can nitpick and say, oh, well, this is not good enough, and especially if you don't like the CNC marks on the blade, you're going to be like, oh, it's lazy, it doesn't deserve, I shouldn't pay $940 for this. But honestly, with relative to other knives that are out there for that kind of money, I think it's perfectly justified. And like I mentioned earlier with the case here, this honestly, for me, if you upcharged, so let's take the Spectre again, for example. Spectre comes in a taco pouch with the COA, Certificate of Authenticity, and a little hex tool for adjusting the detent. If they had charged like another $100 to get some cool little Holt Blade Works case with this kind of stuff in it, I would absolutely pay that much more for something like this. This, in the mid-tech world, it seems, a lot of makers don't try when it comes to their packaging. Now, some do. Like, Craig Brown, he's got some situation like this. Little kind of like Nowpack Pelican case kind of stuff, whatever you want to call it. And some people do, but like with the Holts and Shirogorov especially, you get like a box. You get a little dinky cardboard paper box that's like this big, this wide, and the knife is wrapped up in a microfiber cloth with a bear on it, and that's it. That's all you get. And this guy's $895, and the F95 comes with the same stuff, and it's $1,100. So the fact that they at least tried and put some effort into making like the packaging nice, and they gave you this tool to take it apart, and the nano oil, and the bottom comes out, and there's the COA, and you even get a sticker. You get a sticker with most knives these days, but I mean the nano oil and the torque screw, like, come on, that's like that makes it. That makes the difference to me. And I imagine it would to other people too, especially if they've got knives like the Spectre and the Shirogorov stuff. It's a nice touch, and it's just kind of like a little touch of class on top that I think justifies the value of this knife. So there's my rant. I'm out of breath, not really, but there's just a lot to talk about with this knife, because it's been around for a long time, and like I said, it's kind of the king of the hill. The Spectre has really come up to kind of rival it, but there's 3,000 of these. There's only 300 of the Spectres. So that's something to consider, is that this knife has history, and so there's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say clout behind it, but it's got a reputation, and I think there are little things that the Norseman has, like even the packaging that makes the knife, that really kind of holds its class well, even though it's kind of gone up in price and and gone on other changes, I would imagine. But it's just the little things, I think, especially to me, that I notice. So this has been the Grimsmo Norseman. I hope you have enjoyed my rambling and opinions, and if you did, go ahead and like the video and leave a comment, or if you didn't like the video and you didn't like me rambling, then tell me in the comments. So thank you guys for watching.